I'm going to call us back to order here. This is the afternoon committee meetings of the Bellingham City Council. The next meeting is the Justice meeting, and that's chaired by Councilmember Barker.
Hi, we have one item on our agenda here. It's the recommendations in response to Safe Spaces report. I'm joined today with the Justice Committee with Councilmember Vargas and Hamill. And I'll turn it over, I imagine, to the Mayor or Brian to introduce your agenda bill. 26. Oh.
So as you probably remember, we had some residents' concerns about potential conflicts with city staff in different arenas. And I think in general, our staff does a very good job of responding to concerns that come from citizens. I know all of you do. I know I do, as far as, responding when people have concerns. The area that I was most concerned about was anyone in an underrepresented segment of our city who felt intimidated by City Hall or felt there was a reason, whether by language or by a multitude of reasons why they wouldn't come here to tell us of a concern, wouldn't tell us of the concern. I wanted them to have a safe place to go. And so when I was directed to come up with a policy, we contacted the Dispute Resolution Center. David Dahl, our police chief, was already working with them on this issue because there had been the issue of citizen oversight of the police department, which isn't part of this recommendation, just to be clear. And so Moonwater did her usual thorough job and hired a consultant that would went out in the community and interviewed people, interviewed some of you, interviewed me, interviewed those that were concerned, interviewed the police, I mean, everybody. And and then she had recommendations about what to do. The first recommendation was that she felt like there were some corrective actions we could take. In the case of just put the police on the forefront right now, I think the police has already put things into practice already that were responding to some of the concerns that people had. And I just want to remind us all that we do have a citizens committee, advisory committee for the police department. And I know that Chief Dahl has some very good ideas about how to expand and activate that particular committee. The second was that potentially we didn't, not that we didn't have any problems, because everybody has problems and everybody can do better, but relatively speaking to a community like Seattle, Chicago, let's talk about big communities that are under federal orders. I mean, we've done a good job of training our police. So the main thing I wanted to do is make sure it wasn't police focused, and these recommendations are not, and that it was more of a intimidation, underserved communities, the type of thing that would make people uncomfortable to walk into City Hall, come to my office, or call one of you, which hopefully is, and Moonwater did not think that was a whole lot of people, because obviously you're the elected representatives, as am I. So I think she came up with very good recommendations about how, oh, and then the other bigger piece of that was the ombudsman. And at the point that we were talking with her about the results, it didn't appear that having a formal ombudsman, full-blown separate department was maybe the first step that we would take, because we need to see what our experience is using a third party as the safe space. So I'm very appreciative of her looking at both what we could do internally, but what she could do, Dispute Resolution Center or someone else, to help us go through trainings, to participate in mediation, so understand the mediation process, to, one of the things that was requested by the Human Rights Commission was to post principles in each of our buildings that talk about our principles for how we treat residents in our city when they enter our doors. I think that would be great. Our problem is we have a whole lot of different principles, and so we're gathering those now so we can come up with something to show you that would embody the essence of what our community wants to be known as far as how we treat the people that live here. And then they would be the temporary safe, could be the temporary safe place if we wrote a contract with them. And they would also help, like I said, with trainings for our personnel and basically just a whole bedside manner and you know, that doesn't say, that is not the expression I really want. It's that welcoming when you come to City Hall, no matter who you are, that we take your concerns seriously and appropriately, because everyone that comes to City Hall may feel that they have a problem, and if we've gone through and investigated things, sometimes it's a real problem, sometimes it's a perceived problem, and sometimes it's an interaction, and we want to make sure we know which one of those it is and that we actually deal with it. So I'm happy to take any you know, comments or whatever the council would like to talk about with this, but I do think it was an appropriate level response, and I would really like to look at this first step approach. And if we need more, you know, we need a full-time ombudsman, or we need, you know, other kinds of committees, I'm open to doing all that, but I want it to be based on what our problem is.
Did you want to go over the other points that you had put here in the memo that you were suggesting for the budget process? You have 5.
I was not going to go through the
Okay.
details. I was going to let Brian do it.
Okay.
I just wanted to, I wanted to set the stage for why I was interested in this to begin with and how I felt about the overall recommendation. So Brian can go into the details. He's a
Right.
detail guy.
Brian Heinrich, Mayor's Office and Human Resources. So working from those 5 recommendations, you'll notice on page 216 and 217, I believe, of the packet are the actual 10 recommendations from the WDRC. There is a fair bit of overlap in terms of what I think we can address with that first pilot program. They're not numbered, but I believe it's the first, second, and maybe 6th bullet, just in terms of, you know, working through a pilot program with the WDRC. I think we can accomplish, I think the overarching goal is that accessible, neutral, effective complaint service. And I think, you know, the real opportunity and perhaps the real challenge there is establishing what is the criteria in which someone would seek the WDRC to resolve a complaint. Again, we seek to resolve the vast majority of our complaints and concerns at the lowest level. So those are handled like at finance front counter staff or with the permit center staff, or, you know, maybe it's at the librarian level. We can resolve the great number of those in those interactions, but we certainly understand that there's others that might need a bit more work, a bit more research, a bit more understanding. And so we think piloting with the WDRC can accomplish that. With respect to some training, I think the mayor already referenced the implicit bias training that the police department has undergone. We'd like to pursue, and I list a couple, or I'm sorry, a handful of those are listed here. De-escalation training, we've done some of that previously already, and certainly not all staff. We'd like to continue that and really focus again on being strategic in terms of, you know, these are trainings that would be beneficial for all staff, but that is a logistical challenge with work schedules and how trainings are offered and the ability to have all staff go through those, but that'd be certainly the goal. We looked at, and this is something that's come up previously, we looked at vacancies on city boards and commissions. There's a bullet that references that. I think it might be the last one, number 10 there. We've talked about this before. We believe we can do a better job recruiting for our existing boards and commissions. There's a number of vacancies today, so we'll, Vanessa's not here, but we've talked about this before. We need to put some more effort behind that. That's an opportunity to bring in different voices to the city who do inform the work that we do.
And we did change the resident, you could be a resident and not a citizen.
Yeah.
So we felt like that would maybe open the door to maybe some of the underserved populations better.
I think I would add, a number of the recommendations are prefaced with the consideration. And I think number 4 speaks to that. I think at the mayor's direction, the department head team will do just that. What are the ways that we can do the things that we provide better? So when you look at like bullet number 4, bullet number 5, those really speak to that. So I think that'll be up to the department head team as we meet regularly to really think about what are the steps we can take. Is that something we need to go out and contract for? Do we need to find, is it a consultant or a coach or a trainer? What does that look like to accomplish those things? Are there other organizations in Bellingham that can help us do that? The mayor referenced working with the Human Rights Commission, I believe. And that's an opportunity. How do we engage them to accomplish that? And then number 5, I think, is just more of a statement from the mayor that I recall when in 2012, that was one of the initial things the mayor did was we don't notice it as much, but the doors were all locked. And that is not the case.
You can come in now.
And we certainly, I believe, we certainly try to embrace that open door policy. I think council does as well. Council office, certainly other offices in City Hall do. So continue that practice.
And also, if you look down into the paragraph right under the bullets, where it says learn to love complaints, it really is true. I mean, we don't change and grow unless people come to us and tell us that something could be done a different way. And I know that at certain points in time, sometimes it feels like you've heard the complaint over and over and over. Well, you might want to listen better. On the other hand, not all complaints can be responded to the way that the individual would like it to be. There's a difference between hearing you and agreeing with you, and we look at this from the perspective of the best thing for the public interest in total, but we also look at the individual being treated with respect, and that's very important.
Thank you.
And then the other part of this is, I'll emphasize, this isn't for all complaints. This isn't my water bill's too high. Those things we deal with more factually. This is more of a interaction between individuals, or unhappiness about being able to get into the door, or having the dispute resolution center be able to say to someone who is unhappy about their water bill, here's the process and we'll get somebody to help you through it, rather than we're going to take this on as the dispute resolution center because you're unhappy about the fact that water rates are too high, and that's something the council will change, not us.
Thank you. So just to acknowledge that we only have about 10 minutes left in our committee, and I want to I'll call on Councilmember Hamel, and I'm assuming Councilmember Vargas. I just also like to acknowledge that we have Councilmember Lillquist and Knudsen, as well as Deputy Chief Dahl. Sorry, can't get the deputy part out of there. Chief Dahl is in the audience here with us. So Councilmember Hamel.
First of all, I think this is a really good presentation here in the packet, and the item, the 4th bullet point item, which is consider ways in which the city could be more intentionally guided by a spirit of cultural humility and respect for the historical and institutional forces that have caused the marginalization of these communities. And then the next one, the renewed commitment to human rights, what that could look like for the city. I think those are really, those are great. I would understand what does that look like then? And I know that it sounds like that's being worked on. I would just want a little bit of definition around that. And then a simple question, how would this process be made known to residents in our community? So how would a person know how to go through this if we were to adopt this?
And I think that's part of the details that need to be worked out, but obviously it would be public education, it would be the communications, like anything we do for a city program. It would be letting neighborhoods know, it would be letting some of the underserved groups, talk to them directly about this. It would be whatever would be effective for us to do. So any suggestions you have, great, or we're going to work with, obviously, if Moonwater takes this contract, which I think she's been willing
They're
to
interested,
do.
for sure.
They're interested in doing, work with the Human Rights Commission and the Dispute Resolution Center and other groups that may regularly interact with.
Pinky?
Dan asked some of my questions, so we're halfway there. I think this is great. It's a multi-layer approach. Obviously, internal training and our language, our actions, those things are critically important. But also, I think the big part of it is how people feel we are being receptive, and that means people who may never ever walk into City Hall. And how do they know how to reach out to this liaison person? So for me, the bullet on 215, how we develop an accessible, neutral, effective complaint service is the critical piece here in ensuring that the public feels they have a place to go. So for me, that is, yes, we have internal work to do, absolutely all willing to get on board, but how do we make sure that that works and that people know about it and they understand that that resource is there for them and kind of what that's going to look like?
I think it's us going to them. I mean, that people that won't come here, we have to reach out. So all the different ways that we can reach out, we're going to have to explore, but there's certainly some obvious ways that we can, because there are established communities within our community that are made up of some of the underserved populations, and it's not just necessarily race. It could be sexual orientation, it could be female, it could be, I mean, there's a lot of different underserved areas that we could work on. But I think we can't sit back and wait for everyone to come to us, because that's that's the problem now. Mm-hmm. We need to reach out and be open to talking to everyone. I actually feel like the city does obviously some of that. You do. You know, your job is to be out in the community representing the city and listening to the concerns and stuff, and bringing that back to the city. I mean, that's one of the main functions of council members, which I rely on a lot, is to have that happen. But we're open to it, and we'll bring you back more details. We just wanted to know if you thought we were going in the right direction.
Councilmember Hamel?
To your earlier point about gathering the language to have posted within the buildings, this council adopted a human rights resolution last year that outlines some of the priorities and values that the council saw fit to memorialize in a resolution. So I think that might be a contributing, it may not be the document to pull from, but we also have our legacies and strategic commitments and things like that. I think there's between those documents, I think we can probably put together.
And the Human Rights Task Force also had some language. So we just thought we'd look at all of it and come up with a recommendation, hopefully that mostly mirrors what you have already done.
Okay.
And that resolution is in the packet. Was that the
Mm-hmm.
correct? That's the one you were referencing last time we met, correct? Yeah, we were having that. And this legacies and strategic commitments are the two that we identified as. Let's start there and see where is there overlap. What does that look like if you can imagine putting them together, so to speak, to develop that?
So do we want to amend
principles.
the one that you passed because there was something that we didn't include?
So I'll take a turn here. It was, I think it's a great first step to frame the conversation, so I'm glad that you brought it forward. I think when you look at 4 of your points and then several of the WDCR points, it was a major over and over, it's this community voice. And I think we could either address that with, as part of that pilot program, that the community's being engaged in that process to go over maybe some questions, some things that we might be proposing where they could take a look at it and give us some feedback. Certainly on things where we're talking about gathering principles. I mean, that would be an excellent place if they are having a group that they're coming forward to saying, okay, here's our pilot project. These are the things we're thinking about doing. They're getting feedback before they're even bringing some of those issues forward. And it over and over, I think, pushes that point of getting the community voice to the table. And for your 2, 3, 4, and 5, those are all going to be dependent on that. Because as you said, I mean, if we're the same people in the room over and over again, we're just going to figure out the problems that we think exist and maybe not the problems that are actually out there. So I'm supportive of the pilot program, understanding that you're putting a line item to support this in the budget. But I need to just be a little bit more clear on that it wasn't necessarily just the external complaints where people would prefer to go there instead, but it's a true pilot on how are we going to broaden and develop this community voice and elevate some people in the community to a place where they're truly advisory in this process. I think if we do community engagement right, we're never going to be done with the job. And so it's certainly, this is something where I think this council really recognizes, and I'm sure the mayor as well, that this is not a one and done and a pilot and like it went over, that we're going to have to, there's going to be one community that will elevate in status and another that will fall off. And we're always going to have to be kind of working that out to make sure there's always a place. And I think when we talk about open door, I mean, certainly to us it might feel like an open door, but to others it might not. Mm-hmm. And I do agree with you. I think the Whatcom Human Rights Task Force, one of the ones that hasn't come up very often is the Whatcom Family and Community Network. They've been working to build a resilient community. They do the ACEs training. The trauma-informed training is probably where you're going to get the most informed and the least expensive and the most connections in your community. And when you said community within community, all these groups have been developing not only their own boards, but their own people that have gone through their trainings and different things. So I would really like them to be part of the discussion. I don't know if it would be worth... so that we don't lose sight of this in a future council meeting, maybe during the Justice Committee, we could invite somebody from the Whatcom Human Rights Task Force and Whatcom Community Family Network, and if anybody else has somebody, where we could talk a little bit about what are some of the things you'd like to see. So as you're working with the WCR and a pilot program, we have a better idea of what people are wanting from us, because exactly, to one person, an open door might be a closed door to another. So
in 1994, I voted for creating the Whatcom Family Network at the state level, and it was supposed to be way different, unfortunately, than how it turned out. We do great. Ours is wonderful, and Dale Branlin and I especially worked with this group quite a bit when we were in the legislature together. It was supposed to be a way for the community to identify social service needs, and then the state to send the money locally without all the strings attached.
Oh, yeah, that didn't work.
And, well, the existing budget director at the state level was not real excited about sending money to communities without strings on it. And I said, well, you can always measure the performance. You know, it doesn't have to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that was always a little disappointing to me. And then I saw what our community did with it. They took a gap, and they stepped in and started filling it, and it's changed over time. So that was Jeff's group, right?
Yeah. No, Christie's.
So I'm happy to work with you, April, in figuring out what might be a way to engage the public. The other thing that we have that people forget about is we do have a public process. I mean, we don't always have to create something new. We have to support people either in using the process we have also or changing the process we have so people feel it's more accessible. So I don't think we should be afraid of looking at that too, because there is a lot of process. If we think some of it is just, it's not dictated by state law, so it's stuff we've put in place, this is how it works. we can always look at that and decide if we want it to be a little bit different, so that we don't have to always create a new body, which then takes new supervision and, I can go on and actually examine what we have. We have boards and commissions right now, some of which are very valuable and some of which don't have a whole lot to do. So I think the bigger, to me, the bigger implications of this is, how do we get residents in our community involved in the democratic process so nobody's voice is left out? And that's my big 10,000-foot goal, and we're starting small with a pilot project, but I definitely don't see that this is the end.
Okay, that's our time. Sorry, Michael, did you want to say something before we close?
I did, but it would take more than 15 seconds. so.
Okay. Pinky, closing?
Yeah, if I may, one quick question. I was just curious if we had any idea of a timeline to develop the complaint service?
So when we introduce the budget, when the mayor introduces the budget here in October, that'll be sort of the start of at least getting the funding for that. We'll can start those discussions with the WDRC. Like I said, the challenge and the opportunity is laying out that criteria, and we want to work collaboratively with them because I think they're going to have some good ideas in terms of outreach as well. So I think the shortest answer is, I think as soon as possible, but I don't expect it'll be in place before the first of the year.
And then just to close, so the committee understands what I'll be looking at is certainly maybe having, like we used to do in the planning committee meetings, where we bring some people forward, maybe have some of those discussions for council to understand what people are looking for. Also, our internal policy, what is our internal policy on complaints, and looking at that. They gave a great example of the Complaints Good Practices Guide for Public Sector Agencies, which is a wonderful opportunity for us to look at that. And then I think, Dan, I can work with you further, but that idea on the human rights piece, and some people called it it was called, I'm gonna mess it up, human rights policy. I'm missing it there, but I'll follow up with you and just figure out how we can maybe keep this dialogue going and center ourselves down so we can give you better direction on what we're looking at. So with that, end of committee.
Thank you. We'll take a brief break and come back with Committee of the Whole.